Good afternoon. Welcome to another one of the Lunch and Learn webinars. I am Kobe and I'm joined today by Faranaz, and we're going to be looking at the Verbatim Numeratum and Quick Check test for the evaluation of basic abilities. Just in terms of some rules for the webinar, for those of you who are tuning into this webinar program for the first time, if you experience any difficulties, maybe the sound isn't going well or you see our slides aren't moving on your screen, please do feel free to just mention that to us in the question and chat section that you see on your actual webinar interface. I will be handing over to Faranaz now, and I will be chatting to you again a bit later on in the webinar when it comes to the research part.
Thank you, Kobe, for the introduction, and thank you to everybody for joining me here this afternoon. I'm Faranaz, and if you were wondering, my name is of Arabic origin, and it means joyful and delightful. I just thought I'd throw that in there for you. I'm one of the psychometrists in the account management department, and some of you may know me as Naz, which is much more easier to remember. As you are aware, on completion of this webinar, there will be a quiz to complete as well as an evaluation form, and then you will receive 1 CPD point. So we hope you look forward to the next hour. So I would like to start by firstly defining the word abilities, which means competence or know-how in an activity or task because of one skill or training. And when you think about growing up, we learn to do different things, play sport, board games, swim, speak a different language, and the list goes on. But what were the fundamentals that helped us to achieve or be what we want to be when we finally grew up? Before we can become anything or do anything, we need to have the basic abilities of being able to read and write, work out simple math sums, and have some know-how of paying attention to detail. I would basically call these life skills. And if you really have to think about it, going to school for all those years paid off as you were being taught about survival in the real world. So as Kobe mentioned, today's focus is on the Verbatim Numeratum and Quick Check test and its evaluation of basic abilities. In short, I will try to refer to these tools as the VN, and QCT. I'll begin by providing you with some background information on the 3 assessments and where they can most likely be used. Following on this, we will look at what each tool is made up of and how they can be administered, scored, and interpreted. Kobe will also be giving you a lovely breakdown of the psychometric properties, just so that we all have a feel of the reliability and validity of these assessments. Please do look out for a few polls that will pop up here and there, and I would suggest keeping a pen and paper handy. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to have an idea of how many professionals here are currently making use of these tools. Okay.
We see 27% of you have voted so far, so we'll just give a couple of seconds more for those of you who haven't yet voted. Okay, looks like the majority of you have voted so far, so let's quickly share some of the results. Good to see that there are some honest people in our audience today. So a lot of you saying that you are here for the CPD point, but also some of you indicating that you have been using all of the assessment that we will be talking about today. So for you, I hope it's a nice refresher. And for those who are only here for the CPD point, we hope that we can also add some more value than just a singular point for you today.
And thank you for being honest. We really appreciate it. Okay, so looking at the background info on the Verbatim and Numeratum, both of these tools were developed in 2012. The research versions were added onto the JVR Online platform so that we could collect data to develop the norms. Then in 2015, all the data was analyzed and finally updated norms were generated. At JVR, we tend to get very excited when our research team finally has a good norm sample to work with. And I'm sure so do other professionals that do need to collect data when they are doing their doctorates, etc. So I do have an understanding that it helps to finalize a lot of things on the data end. Just to also note that research items were included to allow for future updates to the two assessments. However, it's important to stress that research items are not included in the overall score. These assessments were developed due to the high demand for assessments of specific abilities and skills that are not necessarily measured by comprehensive mental ability assessments. So both assessments contain subtests that measure fluid and crystallized intelligence, which are both subfactors of generalized intelligence. Just a reminder on what the concepts of fluid and crystallized intelligence are, both of which are considered to be subfactors of general intelligence. In our previous webinars, I know Kirsty did go into more detail about intelligence on the matrigma, so I will just briefly mention fluid and crystallized intelligence. So for fluid, it's your ability to reason and make sense of abstract information, basically assisting you in selecting a strategy to find a solution, whereas crystallized intelligence is related to learning, knowledge, and skills, which assists in the recall of an appropriate formula. So I hope you like my little picture up there, which gives you a nice breakdown of what it means. So fluid and crystallized intelligence form the overall capacity to learn and solve problems that most people refer to as intelligence. Both are equally important and may work either in unison or independently. So, for example, on the numeratum, the number problem section would tap primarily crystallized intelligence since the items represent fairly basic school level mathematical problems. Similarly, the synonyms and opposite section on the verbatim would tap crystallized intelligence, whereas the reasoning section on both assessments would primarily be tapping fluid intelligence. Both assessments would be weighed more heavily towards crystallized intelligence because the main concern is to determine if a candidate has acquired a relatively basic level of a basic level of verbal and numerical skills required for employment. So handing this over to you guys, let's tap into your crystallized intelligence. This is where your pen and paper will come in handy. Let's see if you can solve the number problem. I will give you about a minute or so to complete.
Okay, yeah, looks like majority of you have voted. So let's just share those results with you. And yes.
Okay, so if we have a look at the results, well done. The answer is 93. This is just to give you a feel of some of the questions in the numeratum. I have made them up myself, so they are not straight from the question booklets. Please do look out for more. If we can turn our attention now to the quick check test. The quick check test was developed as part of JVR's prospect screener in 2012 due to there being additional questions. The decision was made to develop the QCT as a standalone product, which was clearly an opportunity in itself. The primary purpose of the instrument is to determine which candidate which candidates have the minimum required detailed checking ability to conscientiously and thoroughly deal with clerical work. For example, being accurate when completing projects and even checking the work of others is an important requirement of most jobs. We all know that assessment processes are expensive, labor intensive, and time consuming. So, being able to assess candidates who do not have the minimum capabilities to meet the job requirements reduces the efficiency and cost effectiveness of the assessment process. The QCT allows large numbers of prospective employees to be assessed quickly and inexpensively. Kobe, what would you say about your detail checking ability, seeing that you work in the research department?
It is definitely not something that comes inherent to me, but gets stretched and definitely gets practiced on a day-to-day basis with looking at the little numbers and the small statistics to really come up with what we are actually really seeing. I'm more of a big picture person, so really take some effort and energy from my side to get into the details and look at the actual detail.
And have you had a chance to complete the quick check test?
I haven't yet. I'm very excited to do it and to see what my actual results will be.
Well, I remember when I applied for the position of client services, I had to do the quick check test because you working with data every day, you data capturing, you generating reports. So it's not something that you can really prepare for. You either have an eye for detail or you don't. Some of you that don't know Kobe, he used to do some counseling work in the military, and I just thought that I would really like to share this part of this information with you guys, because did you know that usage of detailed checking dates as far back as 1947, when the Personnel Research Section of the US Army published a report on the predictive validity of clerical checking instruments. Apparently, these reports indicated that clerical checking instruments, which were primarily based on verbal and numerical detail checking, were being used for the selection and prediction of performance for wartime civilians, no matter their professional skill.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
But wait, there's more going. An even earlier article from Andrews in 1937 reported on the structural validity of a number of numerical and verbal checking tests and their benefits for use in selection. And another gentleman by the name of Judy Cha went even further in 1939 to link clerical checking with dependability, reporting that there's a strong relationship between clerical checking, dependability, and trustworthiness, which makes sense if you think about it, that even in those days, basic abilities were important for selection, just like it is today. Isn't that amazing?
It's definitely an interesting bit of information. Another poll for you guys, just because we want to keep you engaged.
And I love numbers.
Let's just quickly launch that one for you.
Please don't use a calculator.
Okay, seems again like majority of you have voted. Let's just share those results with you.
Okay, the answer is 37.50. Yeah, everybody's gotten it right. Well done, everybody. Okay, so moving on to the administration part of the assessment. The Verbatim and Numeratum can be used for screening, competency-based selection, and training. These assessments can play a very useful role in evaluating an individual's basic abilities. So depending on the position you are assessing for, your participants will need to meet these criteria. They can mostly be used in admin positions, call centers, the police force, and customer service roles such as cashiers. You basically need a participant that is able to read, write, count and has attention to detail. So just out of curiosity, at what levels do you use these tools mostly for, if you are using the Numeratum, Verbatim, or quick check test in your batteries? Okay, okay, there's still a few of you voting.
Okay, let's share those results again. Seems like most people, the majority of the people who are using the tools are using it at a graduate level, NAS, and then also some people using it at the supervisory level.
Okay, that's very interesting to know. If we can, yeah. So just some useful information with regards to the Verbatim and Numeratum. So the Verbatim and Numeratum can be administered to participants that are 17 years and older, whereas the QCT can be administered to participants who are 18 years and older. They should have a reading level of which is compatible to grade 11, NQF level 2, and for the QC2 reading level, which is compatible to grade 12. There is no accreditation training required to use these assessments. They all are South African assessments which have been developed by JVR. They all have South African norms and are available on the JVR Online platform. They can be completed also they can only be completed in English, and answer sheets and manuals can be downloaded off the portal for free. So if I just want to show you, so this is the JVR Online platform, and as you can see where Kobe is highlighting, this is where you can go on the portal to download the answer sheets and the manuals for free. Unfortunately, the question booklets need to be purchased, so you are welcome to send an email to us, and then yeah, we'll assist you with that. For those of you that don't have a JVR Online portal yet, this yeah, you did have a brief look of what it looks like. When you do have access to the portal, you'll be able to download the manuals for the assessments as well as the answer sheets, and you can as many times as you need to. Just please send an email to our client services and they will be in touch with you. Even if you have been administering the assessments using pen and paper, the portal allows you to capture the responses and to generate a report for your participant. You just won't be able to score it using a scoring key. It has to be captured on the JVR Online portal. It's a very user-friendly portal, and you will be able to familiarize yourself with all its functions very quickly. Okay, so now turning our attention to the construction, let's have a look at how all the items were put together. We know that the Verbatim and Numeratum measure various aspects of verbal and numerical reasoning, but how were the items selected? Items were selected for the Verbatim and Numeratum using research conducted with a group of 210 respondents ranging in ages from 17 to 62 years of age, and the average age of the respondent was 26. Women were overrepresented in the sample, and there really is a lot of information on the development sample, but due to the time constraints, we can't really go through everything. However, this information is available to you in the manual. So the verbatim is made up of 42 questions with 5 sections, them being synonyms, opposites, analogies, and reasoning and interpretations. And if I can just give you a breakdown of what each scale means. So synonyms, it's pretty straightforward to identify words that are same or similar. Opposites, identify words with opposite meanings. Analogies, identifying the relationship between a pair of words and identifying similar relationships in different pair of words. Reasoning is identifying an individual's ability to reason with letters and other verbal content. And interpretation identifies an individual's ability to read and accurately comprehend verbal content. Okay, so as you can see from my slide, I've broken down what each of the sections, how many items they each have, and it's so for the first 4 sections, synonyms, opposites, analogies, and reasoning, there are 8 items, and for the interpretation section, there's 10 items. It is a timed assessment, so when I say timed, each section is timed. So if a participant runs out of time during a section, he or she will be automatically taken to the next section. The first 3 sections, the participant is given 10 minutes to complete, whereas the last 2 sections, which are interpretation and reasoning, they will have 20 minutes to complete each section. So here's another question, this time to test your verbal ability. Please select the word that means the same as the word provided. And the pronunciation of that is recuperate.
Looks like majority of the people have voted, so let me quickly share those results. And everybody got it correct.
I see you all are getting the hang of this. I should have really made it harder. Okay, so if we move on to the numeratum, this assessment is made up of 28 questions and has 3 sections, number problems, patterns, and interpretation. So if I have to go into more detail on that, your number problems are simple mathematical problems composed of addition, subtraction, etc. Patterns identify, the candidate has to identify patterns in numerical content, and for interpretation, they have to identify, read, and interpret basic numerical information. As you can see, the number problems and the interpretation scales have 10 items that the participant has to complete, and for patterns, the participant has 8 items to complete. Each section, the participant has 20 minutes to complete the section, and then automatically, if time has run out, it will move on to the next section. So overall, there's 60 minutes to complete the numeratum. Just when you thought I was done testing your numerical ability, to have more of an idea of the pattern section, please figure out the following by completing the series.
Okay. Looks like most of our respondents have answered. Let me just quickly share those results again.
Okay, 90% of you got the right answer. The answer is 38. So if you have to work it out, it's a series of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 in order to get to 38. I hope that makes sense. Just a reminder that for the numeratum and verbatim, calculators may not be used. However, working out paper is allowed. And as mentioned earlier, each of the subtests are timed and participants do have practice examples that they can work through before the timer begins. This is done in such a way that most test takers will be able to answer all the questions in the allocated time. If the individual completes the subtest before the allocated time, this is recorded and reported on in the report. It's also best practice to have these type of assessments supervised, as how sure are you that the participant completing the assessment are really the people that need to complete the assessment.
Also, just on that note, from an ethical point of view and also best practice, whenever we do use or allow people to use scrap pieces of paper to make calculations on, very important that we do consider those pieces of paper or whatever they were using to write on as psychometric material, and we have to take that in again after the assessment to make sure that the integrity of the assessment stays intact and that that information doesn't get shared somehow to the general public, which isn't allowed. So just something to also bear in mind in terms of best practice.
Thank you, Kobe. It's also important that the participant completes the assessment in a distraction-free environment, especially when they need to complete assessments like these that need a lot of focus. Because I know from experience when candidates call us when they're having issues logging onto JVR Online, you can hear in the background that they're sitting in an open office. So yeah, it's best practice to rather supervise them when you are using these type of assessments. Okay, then over to the quick check test. This is composed of 42 questions, and the items were selected from numerous item banks used in assessment and research. These items have been shown in previous research to have adequate psychometric properties. So as I mentioned earlier, the QCT was developed from the prospect screener. So if you would like to look at those psychometric properties, you can just download the prospect screener technical manual from the JVR Online portal. The items with the best psychometric properties were selected for inclusion in the quick check test. So just some useful information. The quick check test is composed of verbal and numerical information. Participants are asked to determine whether one column matches the original column. So they have to select from correct or incorrect when they complete in the assessment. So when they have an item, they need to make sure that it matches what's in the second column. And then if it does match, it's correct. If it doesn't match, they'll select incorrect. These items measure whether the participant is detail conscious and able to differentiate. So I thought I'd just throw in an attention to detail question. If all of you can just look at the top and find the matching letters.
Okay, looks like the majority have answered, and at least it looks like we're not losing any people while talking, Naz. Let me just share those results with everyone.
Yes, that is the correct answer. Thank you everyone for trying. I hope you enjoyed figuring out all these questions. It's good to stretch your brain now and then. I will now hand over the next part of this webinar to Kobe, who will be looking at the psychometric properties of the verbatim numeratum and quick check test.
Thank you, Naz. So I failed to say this during my introduction earlier when we started this webinar, but I am a research psychologist and I am part of the research team here at JVR Psychometrics. So part of our job is to make sure that all of the assessments that we do develop ourselves, but also the ones that we distribute, have good psychometric properties within the South African population. And like Naz has already mentioned earlier, all of these assessments were developed in South Africa and based on South African samples. So I just want to take you through some of the basic information when it comes to psychometric properties, things that we will all be very familiar with, so reliability and validity, and just a very brief snapshot for each one of these assessments. Of course, there is a lot more information available that you can access via the manuals, or you can feel free to contact us and ask us some further questions, but just a very brief and quick overview of the psychometric properties then. Starting with the quick check test, we found there under reliability and internal consistency, Kronbach alpha of 0.86, which those of you who are familiar with statistics will know is a fairly good reliability, something that we are very comfortable with, something that says that there is internal consistency in this assessment. It's working the way that it's supposed to be working. And just to add on to that, then they also looked at the mean item scale correlation, which is basically an indication of how well each one of the single items correlates with the overall test score. And they looked at what that mean correlation for each item with the actual scale will be, and that was a Kronbach alpha of 0.41, with literature that indicates to us that above 0.35 is usually a good indication of a consistent measurement and something that we feel really comfortable with. In terms of the validity, for those of you who aren't stats boffins or who don't spend lots of time reading the psychometric property parts of manuals, Rasch analysis might be a new word, but basically the only thing that Rasch analysis done is it takes the way in which participants respond to a specific questionnaire, and it maps that to a statistical model. And based on that, you get an indication of how well the items fit the statistical model, but also how difficult these items are, or when you look at your more interest or personality type of questionnaires, how easy it is for people to endorse a specific item, so to choose a specific answer for that item. So in terms of the Rasch analysis for the quick check test, we saw that the item locations ranged from -2.22 to 4.15, which indicates a good spread between easier items or your more difficult items for the sample. And in terms of our fit statistics, sort of the range that we use there is between 0.75 and 1.35, and all of the items for the quick check test fell within those ranges, simply meaning that all of these items are measuring a similar construct and they are adding relevant information to the actual score that a person will get on the test. Moving on then to Verbatim, again going to look at reliability first. And there, when we look at the overall scale score, so on the Verbatim, you get specific scale scores for those scales that Naz has explained to you a bit earlier, and then you get your overall Verbatim score. And when we look at that overall score, the reliability there was a Kronbach alpha of 0.75, good reliability there, very satisfied with that. The individual scales had lower reliabilities than when we look at the overall test. And that just simply means that when it comes to interpretation of the assessment, that best practice would be to interpret the overall score of the Verbatim and use that for recommendations, or if you are planning to make decisions, rather than using the actual subscale scores, but then using them for additional information, but really relying more for the overall Verbatim score then in your interpretations. In terms of the validity there, again, we found a very good item spread but some of the items were relatively easy based on where the items were located in our analysis. But like we said right in the beginning, this is for your basic skills, so to check basic abilities. And having a bit of a more easier item is still relatively acceptable for why the test was developed, which is your entry level and then moving up type of position. So nothing that we are too concerned about over there. And then when it comes to item fit, the majority of the items of the verbatims showed good fit statistics falling within our ranges. There were 3 items that were overfitting, but when it comes to fit problems, you would rather have an overfitting item than an underfitting item. Overfit simply means that there are other items in the test already that's very similar to that item. So it might not be adding as much additional information as a different item would have, for instance. But again, that's something that we are hectically concerned about. And you can read up a bit more about that in your manuals that you can download for free from JVR, as we've been told. Then with the numeratum, you know my recipe by now. We're going to look first at the reliability and then at the validity. Very good Cronbach alpha again of 0.8 for the overall scale. With your individual scale reliabilities ranging from about 0.52 to 0.75. It might seem low, but again, we're not going to interpret the individual scales for decision making. We're going to look at the overall scale, and a lower reliability would just indicate that there were a lot of variance in the way that people responded to the question. So it could also be dependent on the sample as well. So nothing that we are too concerned about as we are looking at overall scale scores for interpretation. In terms of validity, going to look at RASH analysis again, and here again we have a good spread with the item locations ranging from a -2.94 up to a 3.19, and the infit statistics for all of the items were good and fell between the ranges that we are looking at, suggesting that all of our items actually did fit the statistical model in terms of the numeratum. I also want to look at some other African research that is available, and this is research that I was actually involved in, where we wanted to look at how South Africa compares to the rest of Africa. So we did compare a South African sample with a sample that was a combination of 11 other African countries, just because we wanted to look at how the assessment functions in South Africa, but also within the rest of Africa. It's just good practice in psychometric research to regularly look at how your assessment is still functioning within the context that you are using it. And there I want to report firstly on a couple of reliability measures, just so that you can get an idea of what it looks like for different population subgroups. So in terms of, this is just a verbatim and numeratum, not the quick check test. But in terms of reliability for gender or then for country of residence, we see fairly similar results across the board for the verbatim, slightly lower for people that aren't living in South Africa, and fairly consistent reliability for the numeratum as well across gender, but also across country of residence. So that just shows us that the assessment is still working quite well within the South African context, and even outside of Africa, there is evidence that the assessment works within those populations. Of course, bear in mind that the sample sizes were quite different for the South African participants versus the participants from the rest of Africa, and we weren't able to do country-specific comparisons there. Continuing on with the reliability, we also looked at it across ethnicity and home language, and we found that it's still fairly similar across the different ethnic groups, with the verbatim having a bit of a low reliability in the colored sample group, and then also having a bit of a lower reliability in your Sotho-Tswana languages compared to the other languages, which might indicate to us that some of the items might not necessarily be as easily understood by people from the Sotho-Tswana languages, but still relatively acceptable for an entry-level type of assessment that gets used in a battery with other assessments and not on its own for any type of decision making. So just something interesting that I thought we would share with you. And then we also did some other additional analyses just for interest sake and to see how the groups compare to one another. And we first wanted to see if there is a correlation between verbatim and numeratum scores, because we expect there to be one. As Nas has said earlier, they both tap into elements of your general mental ability. And we did find a statistically significant positive correlation between the two of them, as you can see it reported there. So suggesting to us that there is a strong relationship between a participant score on the verbatim and their score on the numeratum. We also then wanted to compare the South African participants with the participants from the rest of Africa on both of the assessments. And for both of them, we did find that South African participants scored significantly higher than those in the other African countries. But also very important to bear in mind here that the effect sizes of those differences were small to medium. So again, just relating back to the huge difference in the sample sizes from the two countries. It might just have been that we were able to get more variance in responses in the South African sample than what we did obtain in the African country sample. So the small to medium effect sizes say that there isn't really such vast differences between the performance of African candidates and South African candidates on the actual assessments. That is all from my side, so handing back to Nas.
Thank you, Kobe. That was very interesting. I especially enjoyed the African research part to see how we differ compared to other countries. So moving on to interpretation, I will be going through each of the reports just so you can have a snapshot of what they look like. If we can start with the verbatim. So the individual report for both the verbatim and the numeratum provides a breakdown of the individual's performance in each of the assessment areas, as well as an overall indication of verbal and numerical reasoning. Normative scores are only presented for the overall score and not for the individual scales. The report indicates whether the individual found the section easy, moderately hard, or difficult compared to others based on their performance on the scales. So as you can see, the results are presented in on a standard scale with a mean of 5 and a standard deviation of 2. This means that most people score between 3 and 7. High scores, which are 7 and above, when a participant scores 7 and above, you can interpret it as a participant finding it easy to work with verbal content. If a participant scores between 3 and 7, they fall within the mid-range, and the participant found some parts easy and while others difficult. When a score is 3 or below, the participant found it difficult to work with verbal content. So overall, verbal performance is the result based on the number of correct items that the individual obtained in the verbatim test. So looking at the counselor's section of the report, there is a table, as you can see, which displays each scale, the percentage of items that were answered correctly, how many omitted items the participant left out, as well as how long the participant took to complete each section. So it gives you a good indication of the participant's speed and accuracy whilst completing the test. And if you look at the numeratum, it's also similar to the verbatim. As you can see, there's also a standard scale with also, if you score 7 and above, participants find it easy to work with numerical content. If you fall within the middle range, participants found some parts easy whilst others difficult. And if they scored a low score, the participant found it difficult to work with numerical content. So also there's a counselor section with counselor section, which also gives you the a table which displays each scale, the percentage of items that were answered correctly, how many items were omitted, and how long the participant took to complete the assessments. So it is a pretty straightforward report to look at. If we look now at the quick check test, if you look at the individual report, it gives you an indication of whether a participant has sufficient detail orientation to succeed in clerical tasks. There are 3 categories, as you can see, which are divided into stand ranges, which are below average check-in ability, average check-in ability, and above average check-in ability. These stand scores are based on a sample of candidates who have applied for entry-level positions in organizations. The report also displays the information in percentiles, which is the percentage of people who score the same as and or below your score. I don't know if anybody has any questions on the report or reports. So I'm just gonna go through a nice case study with you using what we've learned today. I will be focusing mostly on the verbatim numeratum and how you are able to add it to this position. It's basically looking at how you can apply it in the world of work. Okay, so company X has approached me and they are looking to hire an HR intern. If we can look at the requirements of what the job entails and basically what the intern will be doing, you can see that there is communication skills, strong interpersonal and listening, support in handling of employees' payment on a daily basis, conducting research about best practices and current salaries on the respective market. So what this company has done is they've already done the pre-selection and they have so far shortlisted 3 potential candidates. So due to their budget constraints, all participants will be completing the verbatim and numeratum for screening so that we can see where their numerical and verbal abilities lie. So if we can just look at the 3 profiles. So looking at candidate 1, as you can see, the participant scored a 6, which falls within the middle range. He or she found 2 of the scales, which are synonyms and opposites, easy, whereas for the other 3, analogies, reasoning, and interpretation, he or she found it more challenging whilst completing the assessment. Whereas for the numeratum, the participant scored a 9, which falls on the high score range. He or she found 2 sections, which are the number problems and pattern section, easy. However, for the interpretation section, the participant found this more challenging. Going over to candidate 2. Unfortunately, as you can see, it seems as though the participant really struggled while completing the 2 assessments. Both assessment results fall within the low score range. You can see from the red that he found 3 of the sections for both assessments difficult, whereas for 4 of the sections he found it more challenging. It was only for opposites that he really found it easy to complete. And then looking at the last candidate, his or her verbatim results are high. What's interesting here is that 3 of the scales, opposites, analogies, and interpretations, he found quite easy, whereas for the synonyms and reasoning, the participant found these sections more challenging. And for the numeratum, the overall score falls in the mid-range, as a participant scored a 6, finding patterns easier than number problems and interpretation, which was more challenging to the participant. So if you have to look at the 3 results and compare them, it's quite clear that candidates 1 and 3 are the best 2 candidates for the HR intern position. So if we have to refer back to the HR intern profile and its requirements, we've only assessed for numerical and verbal ability, which is great for screening out those participants that don't meet the minimum requirements. But we would need to further investigate and take the 2 participants through to the next round of assessments. So, yeah, that would be my interpretation of it if I had to use the verbatim and numeratum. So I hope it does make sense to you that although the numeratum and verbatim can be used as screening tools, it's not the only option when it comes to assessment. So don't only use it in isolation. Always add more to your battery so that you get so from these 2 participants, when you assess further, you'll be able to choose the best participant for the HR intern position. And that's me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoy a good case study because it really shows how to apply it. And what I think was fascinating about that specific one was that we were able to, with using the verbatim and numeratum, assess for those verbal and numerical skills that were required. But we could definitely see, if I just go back to that slide, for instance, that there were some skills that we weren't able to tap into with these 2 instruments. So we would have to add on an additional assessment, maybe something like a personality assessment, to see whether or not they will have learning agility, for instance, or a preference for that. Just to add some additional information as well going forward and making the decision. Are there any questions from the audience aside about anything that we said? Of course, if you don't feel like asking now, you're more than welcome to send us an email. We will be supplying our email addresses at the end. And we're also just supplying you with a nice reading list of the references that we used. Something of interest that you might also want to look at a bit more. And like we said, if you go onto your JVRO portals, you will be able to see the manuals there under the resources link, and you will be able to download them and go through the research and the development as well as some of the sample reports for those of you who have not been introduced to these 2 assessments before. That is all from our side. So thank you very much for joining us today. Like I said, if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact us. And if you want to know anything more about setting up portals, for instance, you can feel free to please send those emails to info@jvrafrica.co.za. Anything else from your side, Naz?
No, I think I've covered everything. I see there's no questions. Yeah, so you all are welcome to email me and we can send you any more information that you may require.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for joining us. Just again, a reminder, unfortunately, we do have you to evaluate. We do need for you to evaluate the webinar at the end. So just take a few minutes and give us that feedback as well. And also just to complete the questionnaire that accompanied it for you to be able to get your CPD point. As a lot of you did confess in the beginning that that was what you were here for. I hope we did change your mind a bit and added some valuable information for you. And yes, thank you, and then goodbye.
Goodbye.